was the quality of individual Republican campaigns. If you look at it, particularly in the House, since September, North Carolina 13, Representative Budd. Ohio 1 with Steve Shabbat. Ohio 12 with Troy Balderson. New Jersey 3 with Tom MacArthur. Virginia 2 with Scott Taylor. Florida 25 with Carlos Curbelo. Every one of those, which were thought to be toss-up seats, have now appeared to move in the Republican direction in public and private polling. Scott Taylor, for example, leads by I believe it's 8 points in a New York Times poll.
Well, let me push back at that a little bit. I mean, you're saying that the quality of individual candidates matter, individual campaigns matter. I understand that, but we've been hearing for 4, 5, 6 months that really the Republicans' fate isn't in individual candidates' hands. It's this nationalized electorate, the Democratic enthusiasm that wants to paste a defeat on Donald Trump that's going to wash all these people away. You're saying that's not at all universally true.
Well, it isn't. And there's some truth in it because the underlying landscape matters a great deal. But let's take, for example, Florida 27. A Republican incumbent is retiring, very popular. Ileana Ros-Lehtinen. The Democrats nominate Donna Shalala. The Republicans nominate a TV anchorwoman, Maria Elvira Salazar. Everybody assumes Shalala is going to win. And lo and behold, we find ourselves here less than 3 weeks before the election, and the polls are showing that Salazar is either leading slightly or dead even with Shalala. Why? Because she ran a strong campaign and her opponent didn't. West Virginia 3, open seat. Everybody assumed that the Democratic candidate, a state senator, had the leg up in the most Democratic part of West Virginia, and yet we find ourselves in a New York Times poll with Republican House of Delegates member Carol Miller up by 8. Because why? She's running a better campaign.
Well, let's talk about a couple of broader issues here that may be affecting this. One is the economy. A couple of polls I've seen, because of the strong economy, give Republicans the edge over Democrats head-to-head, sometimes by double digits. And yet it doesn't seem to be the main voting issue this year. Why isn't the economy working as well for Republicans as you might think?
I think there are 2 reasons. One is because when the economy gets better, people tend to sort of assume that that's a given. The economy was very strong in 2006 when the Republicans lost the House, and largely because of concerns about the Iraq War and scandals among Republicans. Right. But the economy wasn't being talked about. The other reason, the president needs to set the tone and focus on the economy, and the president has bounced around from issue to issue, from item to item, and the lack of a consistency in not only saying the economy is good, but more importantly, describing what pro-growth policies he's going to pursue in the months and years ahead to make it even better. Those 2 things are missing.
Yeah, I don't see any discussion at all about, for example, what is the Democratic agenda on taxes, for example. I mean, I think they're going to come out and they're going to try, as I listen to them quietly, they're going to try to repeal the tax reform, at least in large part, and raise taxes. But you don't hear Republicans talking about that.
Yeah, and look, let me give you 2 examples of how this could work. In Texas 23, Will Hurd, who is in a 65% Latino district that Hillary Clinton carried, and Don Bacon of Nebraska 2 in a district that Hillary Clinton carried, both were considered to be toss-ups earlier in the cycle, and yet both of them have pounded home on their opponents, saying, my opponent will reverse the tax cut, and my opponent is in favor of a universal government-run health program that will kill your private insurance plan and cost us $32 trillion. And what's happened to both of those candidates? They have both been moved off of the list of toss-ups and into lean or likely Republican, and the Democrats have stopped spending money in their districts.
Well, let me give you, but Will Hurd, I think also, he's distanced himself from the president on immigration, just like Carlos Curbelo in Miami.
Absolutely.
In Miami has. Both of those are saying we need to do something about DACA. We need to get a bipartisan deal on security and legalization of DACA, and that's helped them in those districts. So what about the president's immigration focus here in the waning days of the campaign? Going to help or hurt Republicans?
Well, it depends. We've just seen the first outlines of it. If it is defending our borders, that has got widespread acceptance. If it is we're going to build a wall, that has less acceptance. If it is against finding a solution for the dreamers and finding a solution, a path to citizenship for people who are already in this country, it's going to be hurtful. But you're right. Again, my point is smart candidates like Curbelo and Hurd understand what their districts want and are fighting hard for those kind of issues and running smart campaigns.
All right, Carl, thanks for coming in. We'll have talking to you again before the end of this thing.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
President Trump looking to make...
To send the military to defend our southern border if necessary. All caused because of the illegal immigration onslaught brought by the Democrats because they refuse to acknowledge or to change the laws.
President Trump looking to make immigration a central issue in the closing weeks of the midterm campaign and threatening to close the southern border with Mexico as a caravan of migrants from Honduras makes its way north. The Mexican government announced Thursday that it has asked the United Nations for assistance in screening the refugees in an effort to stop them before they arrive at the U.S. border. But the president is encouraging Republicans to make, quote, the horrendous, weak, and outdated immigration laws and the border a part of the midterm. So is it a smart strategy for the GOP? Let's ask Wall Street Journal columnist and deputy editor Dan Henninger, editorial board member Alicia Finley, and columnist Bill McGurn. So, Alicia, smart strategy or not?
I would say that I think what they're trying to do is galvanize the base.
Right.
Especially in the Trump states, or the states that Trump won in 2016, maybe North Dakota, perhaps even Arizona. But where I think it really hurts Republicans is in these swing House districts, the suburbia, where it really distracts from the Republican message of economic growth.
So it's a mixed impact. Some might help in some states.
Right,
that
but
Trump
I think,
won.
yeah, and in those states, I think Republicans are already pulling ahead. Where we're really concerned about is the House majority,
where they need to pick up 23 seats, and 23 seats held by Republicans where Hillary
Clinton won.
So do you think that a deal on immigration, like a DACA trade for border security of the kind that looked like it was coming together a little bit, would that be helping Republicans now?
Oh, I think it would help Republicans tremendously, especially in those House districts. If you think of Steve Knight in California, Carlos Curbelo in Florida, I really think that it would improve their chances of holding those seats.
I remember Eric Paulson from Minneapolis, St. Paul, came in to see us, and we asked him point blank, would it help you if you had such a deal? He said it sure would. And he's one of those guys in a tough race. Dan, what do you think?
Well, you know, I think that this immigration is becoming a liability for Democrats.
Really?
Look, oh, yeah. And I think that Donald Trump did not create this 4,000-person Honduran caravan coming up from Honduras, right?
No.
And nobody seems to understand what happens with these caravans now that Mexico is actually calling in the United Nations to try to help them resolve it.
Well, they're seeking refugee status, presumably, right?
Yeah, but, you know, the president of Honduras himself claims that his left-wing opponents are creating these caravans to embarrass him. And the head of the Border Patrol, Kevin McAneely, was down there a couple of weeks ago. He could not figure out what was going on in Honduras.
So you think
But the caravans are coming, and somebody's got to do something about it.
Okay, so to the extent that Trump focuses on the caravan and focuses on saying we can't have our borders overrun willy-nilly, that helps the Republicans.
Because the Democrats are in favor of sanctuary cities, which is basically doing nothing. They want to abolish the ICE, Immigration and Custom Enforcement. They are doing nothing about what is manifestly a problem. And I think, especially in some of the big Senate races, this is becoming a problem for Democrats who themselves are telling their candidates, try to stay away from this subject.
All right.
I agree with Dan. I think that immigration is two different issues. If it's about dreamers, people that were taken here when they were young, didn't make the decision, I think there's a lot of sympathy for them, right? If it's about other kinds of issues like family separation, I think it works for the Democrats this way. But I agree, when you have a caravan trying to bum rush the border, that's a different kind of immigration issue, and I think it plays in different districts. I do think there's a danger. I look at my district, a competitive suburban district, classic swing district in New Jersey, where Jay Weber is facing a very attractive Democratic candidate. I think he would have been helped by a more vigorous case for the economy because his opponent is making the tax cuts a big issue. You know, in states like New York and New Jersey and California, people are complaining about the loss of the SALT deduction. So I do think that the emphasis, I do think that Republicans in general have suffered from a lack of emphasis on how good the economy is.
So give these guys what for, Alicia? Why do you think they're wrong?
Well, I wouldn't say they're completely wrong.
Right.
But in terms of border security, yes, I do think that plays to Republicans' advantage. But you don't want you want the message to be on the economy at this point, not the distraction, because immigration is a very divisive issue in the GOP, and candidates are going to be asked, well, what do you think about this, or what do you think about that? And that really puts them in a predicament. And I don't think they've quite finessed the issue.
Well, and I also argue,
effectively.
Dan, I mean, look at what happened with the border family separation at the border this summer. That was fundamentally an issue of, okay, we're going to increase enforcement at the border. That was a fiasco, and that redounded to the Republican detriment, I think, in a lot of these districts, because they looked and said, well, why are we doing this? And yet that was a function of the preoccupation with border enforcement.
But I think the politics have shifted, Paul, and the burden is now going over onto the Democrats for not having any kind of solution to the immigration problem, in the same way that health care has become a Republican problem because people are looking to the Republicans for a solution. They said they would do it. They really haven't. I think that's what's happening to the Democrats on immigration.
Yeah, I think, look, again, immigration is one issue, but when you have a caravan, again, trying to just come over the border, what people dislike is the lawlessness. I think that plays to the advantage. And Democrats are incapable of saying that we should have any border security, I think.
Yeah, well, if it's sanctuary cities, I think you guys are right. That plays. But if it's separation of families, I think that's going to hurt.
Deporting fathers who have been here for decades.
But right now, there's a caravan coming, right? I mean, that was 6 months ago.
All right, gentlemen, and Alicia, when we come back, two closely contested governor's races, giving us an early preview of 2020, perhaps. So can Trump-aligned Republicans in Florida and Georgia. Two high-stakes governor's races shaping up to be a preview of 2020, with Trump-backed Republican candidates in close contests with their progressive Democratic challengers. In Florida, polls show former Congressman Ron DeSantis running even with Tallahassee Mayor Andrew Gillum. And in Georgia, where early voting started this week, Secretary of State Brian Kemp leads Democrat Stacey Abrams by just 2 points. So, Dan, other than these are very important states, large states, what's the significance of these two governor's races?
Well, and to a great extent, Paul, they're kind of proxies for national politics. Donald Trump versus the Democrats now personified mostly by progressive Democrats like Kamala Harris, Cory Booker. That would be kind of your setup for the presidential in 2020. Here in Georgia and Florida, you've got a couple of basically progressive Democrats, African Americans, Stacey Abrams in Georgia, Andrew Gillum in Florida, who has had to deny, incidentally, that he's a socialist because his policies are too far left, running against two candidates who have aligned themselves, Republicans who have aligned themselves with Donald Trump. So it's a very conservative candidate running against the progressive. The other thing I should point out is Stacey Abrams, for example, in Georgia, has spent 5 years enlisting black minority women, younger voters, getting them on the voting rolls. It is a test of the Democrats and the energy, the progressive opposition to Donald Trump, and she is going to be an excellent test of whether the Democrats, by running to the left, but running with a lot of enrolled voters and energy, can defeat the Republicans.
Yeah, Alicia, it's really interesting. You look both sides, both Republicans and Democrats. These candidates emerged almost from their base, the base of their party. I mean, DeSantis and Kemp both wrapped themselves around Trump to be able to defeat more centrist Bush kind of candidates. And the Democratic side, these two candidates, Abrams and Gillum, really the progressive energy. So you have pretty far ideological divide. I mean, one of these two is going to win. It's a very different government in both states.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, you still have to consider that the Republicans will probably hold the legislatures in both states.
Right.
But you see Andrew Gillum, $15 minimum wage, Medicaid expansion, free college tuition. Stacey Abrams supports many of the same things, and they're going to be pushing those. And I think some Republicans, moderates, they may go along. I mean, you have to consider in Kansas, another governor's race that's up for grabs. Many Republicans in the legislature support Medicaid expansion and some of the goals of the Democrats.
Well, so, Bill, I'll tell you, Adam Putnam running in Florida, I think he was a member of Congress, and he lost to the current, to DeSantis. And I think Putnam right now would be running away with this race.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, it's as you say, it's a black and white divide. I think it's also a harbinger for 2020 in the sense that if Democrats can win on this progressive agenda, it'll give them more confidence that they can take those themes nationally against Donald Trump in 2020. It hasn't really happened yet. But it's also clearly where the party is, right? Where the Democratic Party
It's
is.
where the energy
Where the
certainly
energy is.
the energy.
Both African-American candidates in those two states you mentioned. So it's a real test.
So what are the Republicans in these states running on, right? They've had their Republican governors now. What are they saying we'll do in the next 4 years?
Well, I think there is they're trying to moderate a little bit. You see in Florida, DeSantis is talking about cutting taxes, cutting the corporate rate, partly to draw a contrast to Gillum, who wants to raise the corporate rate and raise taxes, which does not play well. In Georgia, Kemp is really focusing on some cultural issues, some sanctuary cities, a religious freedom law, to try to rally that base.
And, you know, one of the X factors here, Paul, when we talk about Republicans and Democrats, by and large, and fortunately all the races we talk about these days, the Republicans and Democrats are locked in completely on their candidates. There are still independent voters in all of these states, and they have got to figure out which way they want to lean. And in states like Florida and Georgia, the choice is pretty clear. These are not too close to, like in Ohio, Mike DeWine running against Richard Cordray. They've been running kind of close together, but not in Georgia and Florida. There's a real choice down there for independents to make.
This is the current. This is maybe the purest expression this year. These races of the polarization in American politics,
right,
where you don't necessarily run into the middle anymore. You try to energize your base.
And I agree with Dan. Henry Olsen has an interesting article on this that people think if people are highly polarized, then you really have to get out your base. And his argument is the way to do it is to try to get the independents, who are the marginal voters, right, and to appeal to them in a way that doesn't turn off your own base.
That's the eternal trick in politics. But how do you? Are there any issues particular this year, Alicia, where they think that where either party's trying to use that? Let's say education, big state issue. Is there a divide there?
Well, especially in Florida. I mean, where you see Gillum hasn't said we want to eliminate all charter schools, but has used that kind of dog whistle with the teachers' unions, that these are unaccountable for-profit organizations and we need to stop them. He wants to eliminate the scholarship, these private school voucher programs that Jeb Bush originated, and whereas DeSantis really wants to expand private school choice.
Okay, thank you all. When we come back, Saudi Arabia acknowledging the death of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi, claiming it was an accident, but with lingering questions about the Crown Prince's involvement. How should the Trump administration respond to Riyadh's latest explanation?
Saudi Arabia has been a great ally, but what happened is unacceptable. Saudi Arabia has been a great ally, but what happened is unacceptable. We are going to see they've arrested, just for the people at the table, a large number of people having to do with the event that took place in Turkey and the consulate, the Saudi consulate. And it's a big first step.
That was President Trump responding to Saudi Arabia's statement late Friday about the fate of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. The kingdom now acknowledging his death, but claiming it was the accidental result of a fistfight, contradicting the government's initial claim that the journalist who was critical of the Saudi regime had left the consulate alive. 18 suspects are said to have been arrested in the case. John Hanna is senior counselor at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He served as Vice President Dick Cheney's national security advisor in the Bush administration. Welcome, John. Good to see you.
Thank you, Paul.
So you've heard the story. The Saudis now say it the result of a fistfight and accident. How credible is that?
Well, that part of the story is still incredible, Paul. Nobody knows for sure what happened inside of that consulate, yet we've had a stream of leaks from the Turkish press over the last couple of weeks that have been reported in virtually every American major outlet, in which they say that this was a kill team sent to Saudi Arabia with the intent to murder Khashoggi, not to somehow lure him back to the kingdom. So that part of the story still just doesn't pass the laugh test.
Do you think that American intelligence would have its own information about what happened here?
I think they will have information. Whether they've got the kinds of goods of surveillance from inside the consulate itself at the time that Khashoggi died, that's unclear to me. We may have to rely a lot on Turkish intelligence for that specific evidence.
Of course, the Turks have their own incentives here. They're something of a rival of Saudi Arabia for influence in the Middle East. So it's hard to know who to trust here, isn't it?
I think that's exactly right. There are so many other agendas going on here. The Turks and their allies in the region, the Qataris, both despise the Saudis. They would be eager to humiliate Mohammed bin Salman, to take Saudi Arabia down a peg. So they've got a lot of incentives here to keep this drip, drip, drip going against Saudi Arabia, and to keep the pressure on the United States to keep pushing the Saudis as well.
Yeah, the people who have been arrested and 5 officials fired, so many of these are in the inner circle of the Crown Prince, MBS as he's known, and yet there's no link to him. But is it plausible to you that the Saudis don't admit any link to him, but is it plausible to you that they would have acted without MBS's approval, at least tacit or explicit?
No, I think as an analytical matter, for anybody who's followed the Saudis and the House of Saud closely, and particularly Mohammed bin Salman, who's known as a control freak, it's hard to imagine something as significant as this happening with the potential international ramifications it's clearly had, not happening without some kind of express order from Mohammed bin Salman.
Okay, so knowing that, then the president calling this a good first step, President Trump, what do you think of that response, and what should we do?
Well, I think just again, as an analytical matter, this is a good first step. I mean, for 2.5 weeks, the Saudis have said that this man left that consulate of his own free will. They've now finally admitted he has died in that consulate at the hands of Saudi officials and on the orders of at least people as powerful and as high a level in the Saudi establishment as you can get without implicating one of the royals or Mohammed bin Salman himself. So I think that is important progress for the Saudis, yet the United States shouldn't be the people vouching for the credibility of this investigation. We still need answers. We need a body. We need to know how Khashoggi was killed in that embassy.
All right, when that happens at some point here in the next few days or weeks, then what can the United States do on a policy front to be consistent with our interests, which is our alliance with Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, but also our values, which means we don't sanction murder of journalists?
Yeah, we first of all got to obviously speak the truth here, which was that this was a brazen, unacceptable breach of international norms against a person under the protection of the United States, living in the United States, working for one of the major American media outlets, the Washington Post. So we've got to be very clear in our rhetoric, very clear that this can never, ever happen again, or it will, in fact, jeopardize the U.S.-Saudi strategic partnership. And there are sanctions that we need to put into place, these global Magnitsky Act sanctions that are very targeted against specific Saudi perpetrators of this action. And then I think we've got to consider real pressure on the Saudis, finally. Don't indulge Mohammed bin Salman as much as we have over the last year. He's now creating more problems for us than he solves, the problem in Yemen in particular.
Right.
I think there needs to be a much stronger U.S. hand to force some kind of political settlement here and get the Saudis to the table.
But if you sanction, using the Magnitsky sanctions, which are aimed at individuals, if you sanction the people all at the lower rungs here, and below MBS, and you don't sanction him, I mean, are you going to look like you've actually let him off the hook?
Well, I think that's always the danger, and that's the delicate line the United States walks. We got to stand up for our values. On the other hand, we have got important business to get done in the international community. You do that with the leaders that are in place in these countries. So long as MBS is there, we've got to be able to do business with him in the interests and in the security of the United States of America. We've seen this in Russia. We continue to have summits with Vladimir Putin, despite the fact he's killing dissidents in England. And we do it with people like Kim Jong-un, where we've got to negotiate an end to their nuclear program, despite the fact that just over a year ago, Kim Jong-un was responsible for the detention, the torture, and eventually the murder of an American citizen, Otto Warmbier.
All right, so it's a very delicate walk. Thank you, John Hanna. Appreciate coming in.
Sure, Paul. Thank you.
Still ahead, Elizabeth Warren.